welcome to another episode of Breadcast Movie and TV Talk. So, since I've caught up on DC EU movies, it's time to get on to discussing Marvel movies that I have not. There are a lot of Marvel movies and way too many to handle in one video. This means I'm going to tackle it in chunks, like talking about the Iron Man movies, Avengers movies, Thor movies, etc. So the first one I want to do is the Iron Man Trilogy. Keep in mind that this is my opinion. This will not be as in-depth as my full-length movie discussions, and there will be spoilers. Let's kick this off with Iron Man. Iron Man is one of the best Marvel movies, even to this day. The start of the movie does a lot to tell you who Tony Stark is without anyone even telling you this information directly. He's riding in a military jeep. AC/DC is playing. He tries to hit on one of the military people. One asks him a question about a model that Tony was with. All this tells you right off the start that Tony Stark is a rich person that any woman would throw themselves at, and that Tony is someone who really only cares about himself. The whole part of the movie takes place in a cave is now like a famous section of this movie. He builds what is now called the Mark I armor, and he makes his escape. His buddy dies, but Tony comes out a changed man, so his death was not wasted. Especially since I think his last words of "don't waste your life" really hit Tony given his actions when he comes back home. He makes a statement that his company is going to take a break from making weapons, which makes Obadiah not too happy. Press conference is when Agent Coulson of S.H.I.E.L.D. makes an appearance to Pepper that they need to talk to Tony about his escape. Tony builds the Mark II. It's revealed that Obadiah is a bad guy because he's working with the people that captured Tony. They collected the pieces of Tony's Mark I armor and then rebuilt it and modified it. Of course, Obadiah had to steal Tony's chest reactor, but hey, whatever. The end of the movie is probably the biggest fault of the movie because it's just Iron Man versus a bigger evil Iron Man. The fight is an alright one, but it ends with a blue laser in the sky and Obadiah getting killed. This is a movie that does still hold up today and is a pretty great movie. The end of the movie isn't anything that hasn't been done before, but it doesn't weigh the movie down that much. Iron Man is a great movie, and very enjoyable too. Then we come to Iron Man 2. Iron Man 2 is the Iron Man movie that is known for being the less good one of the trilogy, and I get where people who say this come from. This movie is kind of Tony Stark's midlife crisis. That's because of the arc reactor in his chest that uses palladium, which is also partially killing him. So he does a few really crazy things, like drive his company-owned Formula One car, or DJing a party that goes south pretty quickly. The thing really with this movie is that there's a lot going on. You have two villains. One is Justin Hammer and the other is Ivan Vanko. These two work together because Justin was impressed with how Ivan tried to kill Tony on the racetrack right in front of several high-class rich folks. Justin's motivations to even work with Ivan is that he has a presentation at the Stark Expo, and he wants to make Tony's Iron Man armor look like crap with his own, let's call it Iron Man inspired armor. Justin's plans to get ruined when Ivan decides that instead of making suits, he wants to make drones. Then Justin wants to show him up because he takes one of Tony's stolen suits and puts a bunch of guns and gives it a new paint job. Yeah, that happened at the party because Rhodey got fed up because he did something nice for Tony and Tony is being really reckless. So Rhodey went down and got in the Mark I suit, the all silver one, and beat up Tony and then flew off. Rhodey flies back to a military base and they decide to keep the Mark I and make it their own, which I don't think legally they can, but hey, whatever. Tony gets out of his midlife crisis when Nick Fury brings him a bunch of things that belong to Tony's dad, and Tony makes a new element, puts it in a triangle piece of metal, and then becomes his new arc reactor core. The other reason that this movie is less than liked is pretty much the whole third act. Things at the expo go south because Ivan hacks all of the drones in Rhodey's suit and makes them attack Tony, who is looking for Ivan. So there's just a bunch of shooting and explosions while Tony has Jarvis hack into Rhodey's suit and eventually does. They both crash and they fight more drones. Then Ivan appears with more powerful Iron Man suit and fights the both of them, and they just waste him with the hand blast. The end of the movie is very similar to the ending of the first Iron Man movie, and that's why people didn't care for Iron Man 2. I still really enjoy this movie. I find it odd that people think it's bad or just not that good because it does the same-ish ending as the first movie. There's still a lot of action, and Tony does develop as a character too. He's really the only character that does develop, period, in the movie. Justin doesn't develop, Ivan dies, and Rhodey doesn't do anything really except for help Tony. So that's pretty much it. Iron Man 2 is a good movie and is enjoyable as well. Lastly, we have the movie that gets more flack than the previous one, and that is Iron Man 3. This movie got the harsh treatment by the comic book fans because of how the movie portrayed the Mandarin. I find that comic book fans seem to just want to know what to expect when they go into a movie. Like, they hear Iron Man 3 is going to have the Mandarin. And fans are like, alright, I want to see a guy that wears a suit and tie and has 10 rings on him, with each ring having a different power. And that's what fans expected Iron Man 3 to do. It's odd to me because in the first Iron Man movie, the group known as the 10 Rings were in the movie and were established as a terrorist organization. I couldn't find if that's how the organization is in the comics or what the 10 Rings really are in the comics, aside from things that the Mandarin wears, but I don't really care. Look, I read a lot of comics too. When something I've read gets the film or TV show treatment, I don't expect it to be exactly the same as the comic. They are allowed to change things, and Lock and Key is a good example of this. The show Lock and Key is pretty different from the comics of Lock and Key, and they're both good. I apologize if this feels like a rant, but this stuff bothers me about fans and fandoms and how much they complain. They expect things to be exactly the way they want it to be. I've not even gotten to the movie yet, so why don't I do that? Iron Man 3 is different from the previous two movies, and it's different in a good way. This was the first post-Avengers movie that we got, and people were curious to see what the world would be like after an alien attack, and more so, how the Avengers are handling it. Well, Tony is not handling it well at all. In fact, he has panic attacks and is building all these Iron Man armors in case of situations that may never happen. He's become an overprotective person from being the one that went through the wormhole in the Avengers. There are people who think that this movie is boring because Tony doesn't spend enough time in suit. I for one think it's great because they've said that Tony is a genius and he always has witty comments, so why not put Tony in situations where his armor is not available and has to overcome the situation by creating something? And that's what he does in this movie. He infiltrates the place that the Mandarin is living in with basically a staple gun and some other things that Tony makes from supplies he got from a hardware store. He's also stuck in the prototype armor, the Mark 42, for most of the movies, so the armor doesn't have all the features of his previous armors. In this movie, Tony goes through an arc starting from a low point due to his experience in the Avengers, and through the events of Iron Man 3, he overcomes his fear and panic and saves the day with help. Sadly, and again, Tony is the only character that has an arc. Even Rhodey, who gets the new name of Iron Patriot, doesn't really have a character arc. This is another thing that ties into my rant earlier about the problem people have with the Mandarin in this movie. In the comics, the Iron Patriot armor is used by Norman Osborn, the guy from the Spider-Man Trilogy, at least in the world of movies. Eventually, the armor is worn by Rhodey, but still, I'm surprised that those comic fans didn't complain about this. The person that is used as the Mandarin is just an Ector. The real Mandarin is a guy hopped up on Extremis. See, that's something they could have done in the movie, is the Extremis armor for for Iron Man for the comics, but they didn't, and it's fine. It's not a big deal. This is good, even if they did a bit of a surprise that's different from the comics. Everyone whined and complained about this and called the movie bad because of it, and it's really dumb if you ask me. Iron Man 3 is a good movie, and it's enjoyable. And that's it. That's what I think of the Iron Man Trilogy. That's all I have to say. So if I added the conversation, leave a comment below. As always, thanks for listening, and goodbye.